smaller workforce. Where are we now with these issues?
I think that that's still something that's evolving, employee morale. There's no question that the downturn really took a toll in employee morale in most organizations, certainly we do business with. Now that the economy is turning around, it's not turning on a dime. It's taking some time. It's been slow, depending on which sector you're in. Of course, you're feeling it to varying degrees. So I think there's still a bit of caution out there. On the other hand, I think employees and CEOs and company leaders understand that life goes on, and so we are seeing talent moving now out of companies, which we didn't see at all for 2008 and 9 and most of 10. So people are sort of sticking their heads up a little more now, so I think there's a little more sense that it's safe to consider different opportunities. But I think morale has definitely improved. I think there's still some caution out there, though.
Many distributors, as you've mentioned, are indicating plans to hire in 2012. Kind of from a practical standpoint, what are some of the signs companies should look for that it's time to grow staff?
I would really keep my eye. It actually goes a little bit back to the morale question. If you've got people who are just working a lot of overtime, consistently working on nights, consistently spending time on the weekends, people can do that for a discrete amount of time, but at some point, if that's your regular job, that you're always putting in 60 hours a week or more, that's probably not going to be a good long-term strategy, and that's probably a pretty clear signal that you need to bring some more folks into the organization.
Kind of moving to that next step, could you share some worst practices based on your experience that companies employ when trying to find the right candidate for a position? I mean, what should distributors avoid doing in the hiring process?
There's a couple of parts to that. So the first part is in the hiring process is you have to be clear about what you're looking for. I know that sounds very basic, but if you don't have a real clear picture of the kind of person you're looking for before you go out and start interviewing, that's going to be a problem. I think secondly, there's a real, I'll call it danger, or maybe that's a little strong. There's a real risk that companies think that there's a lot of talent out there because of the downturn, and that really all they have to do is sort of put an ad somewhere, or maybe surf Monster or LinkedIn or one of these kinds of online services, and they're just going to find tons of great candidates. They will find tons of candidates. They will not necessarily find tons of great candidates. So I think there's an important distinction between finding the people who are trying to find you and finding the people who are the right people for the job you're trying to fill. And sometimes that second category requires you to be a little more proactive. The first category, if you're just looking for a body to put in the job, then you can just post it on your website, post it on some industry associations, see who comes in, and probably come up with some good candidates. And that's fine. But that doesn't always mean you're getting the best candidate. So I guess that's one mistake. The second mistake is once you've identified somebody that you really want to hire, no matter how you've identified them, you really have to pay attention to how you treat them through the hiring process. You have to remember that employee is evaluating you as much as you're evaluating them. And again, I think this is different in 2012 than it was in 2010, when you could make the case that people were just, desperate to find a job. Now, candidates are going to have a couple of offers probably if they're doing a good job search, and that means you've got to treat people well. You have to give them a chance to meet with lots of people in the organization. Just a professional approach. There's nothing magic to it, but you really have to think about how you treat candidates and think of them almost as customers. So I think those are probably the two biggest mistakes.
On the flip side, what are some of the best practices that you've seen?
Well, one thing that I do see larger distributors doing is building internal recruitment capability. Usually in their human resources department, they might have, a handful of recruiters who are, working proactively to go out and find really good candidates. And that's pretty common in big distribution companies now, and that's a good practice. The real thing about recruiting is, every leader in a wholesale distribution company should think of themselves as a recruiter. When they're out calling on customers, when they're out at conferences and different events, they should always have an eye out for talent. And if they see interesting people, even if they don't have a slot for them, they should always engage them and almost build a pool of people that they might draw from in the future.
You mentioned some of the larger distributors have a handful of recruiters to work with who work proactively to find candidates. Is there a way for smaller distributors to adapt that model to fit the resources that they have?
Probably the best thing they could do, if they don't have the ability internally to do that, there are services out there where they can bring a recruiter into their office for 2 months to literally sit there and work their way through hiring and finding candidates, and it's really on an a la carte kind of a basis. It limits your costs. It starts and finishes when you need it to start and finish. So that's a manageable expense for a smaller distributor, no doubt about it.
So how important is it to consider culture when looking for or hiring a new employee, and how can distributors account for that in the process? Are there some questions or ways to uncover whether someone would be a good fit?
Well, first of all, it's incredibly important. It would be hard to overstate how important cultural fit is. Before working in search, where I've been for 15 years, 16 years, I guess, I worked in outplacement, worked for a company that help people, executives who had lost their jobs, find their next job. So I spent a lot of time talking to executives and people at all levels in the organization who had just lost their job. And if it wasn't just a massive downsizing, if it was just an individual, invariably the reason they lost their job wasn't because they were incompetent. It wasn't because they didn't know their job. It was because the culture had changed in the company. The leadership style had changed. The expectations had changed, and they didn't keep up with it. That's where they fell short. So culture is huge, and cultural fit is incredibly important as a part of the assessment process with candidates. Now, it's not so easy to do that. It's much more art than science. What I would suggest to people is the way to assess cultural fit is to not only listen to what people say, but listen to how they say it and how they behave. I think it helps to have several people in your organization interview candidates so that you get several different points of view. I think a good way to assess cultural fit is to see the person in a different environment, maybe take them out to dinner, maybe meet up with them at a conference. You just want to get as many opportunities as possible to see the person in a different light. And you can also ask questions. A question that I think is always an interesting question to uncover cultural fit is something along the lines of, tell me about the worst boss you ever had, or tell me about the worst place you ever worked for, or the best boss you ever had. And answers to questions like that start to give you clues on cultural fit. The last thing, which is maybe the most powerful thing, is doing really comprehensive references. We always do 360 references, 360 degrees. So we're going to talk to 2 people this candidate worked for. We're going to talk to 2 people who are peers and 2 people who worked for them. Wholesale distributors can do that on their own. You got to talk to a lot of people, and don't call the HR department necessarily, because they're just going to do the perfunctory, here's the dates they worked here, et cetera, because that's sort of the rules. But you'll be surprised what people tell you if you engage hiring managers or, peers and bosses in conversations. That's really a very good way to assess culture and what the person's true style is.
Seems to me taking that extra time to make those calls could save you some trouble down the road.
It could save you a ton of trouble. It's, the trick with that, people don't always know how to do that. That's also one of those things you may want to think about engaging a particular service for. You can outsource that to a company that does it all the time. And I'm not talking about criminal background checks and that sort of thing, which you should do, but I'm talking more about, conversations with people that really know these candidates to just, what are they like? What's it like working with them? What kind of a colleague are they? How do they get in trouble in the organization, or all those kinds.
Kind of related to culture, on the blog at your firm's website, one of your colleagues wrote about how a talented person might not be a great fit to lead an organization or department because they lack some of the soft skills necessary to do so effectively. How can you uncover whether a candidate for a position has the soft skills necessary to excel?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's hard to do. The first step is figure out what the soft skills are that the person needs. So say you're hiring somebody to step into a role where they're going to really be building a function or building a new line of business. Those kind of people, the soft skills they need are very, very different than the soft skills somebody needs to come in to lead a procurement group where the average tenure is 22 years. So, in the first category, you need people that can think fast on their feet. You need people that are comfortable with ambiguity. In the second category, you probably need people who are good at resolving conflict, who are great listeners, who know how to engage employees, who know how to lead people sometimes without authority. So step one is understand what those soft skills might be, And then really a very good way to do this is to look at past assignments that the person has had and how successful they've been in those assignments. Most people have the canned answers to the questions, but look at their experiences and look at their results. You know, if you've got a position, to go back to that example, that's going to require, you know, somebody to step into a team that's already intact and has got a lot of seniority, you want to find out when they have done that before in their career, and what went well and what didn't go well. A question I'll often ask people in those kind of situations is, as you look back on the approach you took to that job, what did you do that you now, in retrospect, say, gosh, that didn't really make much sense, or that didn't work very well? And then the flip side, what did you do that was really important for the success of that team? And people should be able to talk about those things pretty concretely.
Right, that's really helpful.